Order. Welcome to the first public session of the Business and Trade Select Committee in this Parliament, where we are returning to what is unfinished business for this committee, which is justice for the subpostmasters who were wronged by the Horizon scandal. Thank you very much indeed for joining us as witnesses, and let me thank those subpostmasters and former subpostmasters who are joining us in the public gallery today. I hope that the message that you take from this committee hearing today is that we will follow this tenaciously and relentlessly until justice is done in what is the biggest miscarriage of justice in British history. To our witnesses, thank you very much indeed for joining us. You were all wronged by the Horizon scandal in different ways, and you have all, therefore, sought remedies and redress through different schemes. So Alan Bates, you are applying through the GLO scheme. Jill, you're applying through the HSS scheme. And Derry, you're applying through the HCRS scheme that deals with overturned convictions. But so Alan, perhaps I could start with you. I mean, first, congratulations both on your recent nuptials and on your knighthood. We're now 2,785 days on from when you first commenced your action against the Post Office. Have you now received your settlement for redress? No. What on earth is going on?
I wish I knew. I think the bureaucracy of the whole thing is definitely a big problem. It's funny, I've jotted a few notes down. My initial claim went in on the 12th of October 2023. So it's over 13 months now since my original claim's gone in for the scheme. I've received my 80% of the offer, which like most people have, which is all very well and good, but we don't seem to be getting very far forward. And one of the things I've noticed of recent is I keep contesting what DBT keeps saying about my claim, but one of the things I've noticed of recent is that ever since these schemes began, behind the scenes, that they've been shifting the goalposts. In other words, the wording on the paperwork, on the terms and conditions of things like the GLO compensation scheme guidance and principles have changed on a number of occasions since the scheme began, and certainly since my application went in.
So what do you think is going on here?
I don't know. I really don't know, and I think this is something that we're quite pleased that you're looking into, the committee's looking at. They do get bogged down. I think you'll hear from the lawyers later some of the problems they've had along the way. But speaking for my own personal case, is I don't know whether it's something personal about my case or whatever. I know I'm towards the front of a lot of the claims, but it's they just seem to be. You're told it's one thing, the scheme, and then you find out it's something different. Perfect example of that is when we started off this scheme, it was never meant to be purely about legal considerations, legal technicalities in anything. But they seem to be applying this the whole time. Legal tests seem to be key, the whole point. Now, to give you an example of what I've just been saying about them changing or shifting the goalposts in it, in the original GLO scheme guidance and principles, I'm only going to do the front page, I'm only going to do one of the paragraphs as an example in there. In the original one, it says, in point 1.2, in awarding compensation to postmasters, the scheme will be guided by consideration of fairness in addition to applying established legal principles.
Was your offer fair? Sorry? Was your offer fair?
In whose eyes? This is the big thing. Where's the fairness test come in? But I'll get to that in a moment. But what I would say, the more recent version, 29th of November 23, that has changed. That it actually says the central goal and key overriding principle of the scheme is to deliver compensation to eligible postmasters full and fair, restoring them to a position that had not been in. Decisions will be taken in light of established legal principles. Purely, what they've lost from that is fairness out of that phrase there, even though they do repeat fair and whatever, fair and full. And the other point on that test is where we're not clear about where fair comes in. Further on down, 2 sections down, it actually, 2 paragraphs, or 2 sentences down. The scheme will take into account all relevant facts and matters presented at the claim in order to produce a fair result for the sub-postmaster.
Yeah.
Now, is it in the eyes of the postmaster that it's fair, or is it in the eyes of DBT? They think it's fair. There's no clarification on the fairness test in all of this, and I think that does cause a bit of a problem.
So we've got a missing fairness test, you would say?
I would say that at the outset. Well, it promises in the initial paperwork, it promises to a fairness test in addition to the applying established legal principles, whereas later on, the version that's there, it only mentions established legal principles.
Yeah.
It's dropped the fairness from there.
And the stage of the process where this is going wrong is in the negotiation. So there was an initial offer put on the table, and it's now being negotiated endlessly by the sound of it.
In my case, I wasn't involved in my original claim in putting with the figures for my claim. That was left to my solicitors and also to the accountants they were using to assess everything. So they put my claim together. They submitted it, I agreed it, I submitted it. All I did is provide information and answer questions that they wanted in that case. It was rejected, so it came back. And I looked at it at that point there, and I actually reduced what my claim was because I felt that was fair. That was me applying the fairness rule. But it was still rejected by DBT when it went back. And then they just processed it through the different stages.
They tell you why it was rejected when they rejected it?
Oh, they just don't agree. Don't agree with it.
I'm trying to understand what you think is the motivation here. I mean, is it lawyers just trying to keep the bill down? Are they trying to time people out so that people basically die before they get their redress? What do you think is the motivation here in those that you're negotiating with?
I think there were a lot of loose ends when the scheme was set up, and these should have been nailed down to start with. I also think that ourselves, like the JFSA, or even the lawyers, weren't involved in the finer details or how the briefing of the government's lawyers who were assessing these claims, how they were going to be instructed to deal with them as well. And I think that would have been very useful at an early stage as well. So everyone knew how things were going right from the outset. But it seems that though we agreed a basic scheme at the outset and some of the early documentation in to do with the scheme, and then our lawyers sort of took over on our behalf, the DBT went off and they instructed their own lawyers, who then instructed their own accountants, and we don't know what they were instructed
and
to do.
Do you know when this is going to draw to a close?
I wrote to the Prime Minister about a month ago.
You did. You've written to him twice.
I wrote to him initially about a month ago, and I said that it should be finished. It needs to be finished by the end of March 2025. A deadline should be set, and we asked for his help in setting this deadline. I never received a response. I wrote to him a few days ago to remind him that I'd never received a response, and also now we're at 5 months until the end of March 2025.
So the Prime Minister said on LBC on the 5th of January, he was obviously leader of the opposition then, he said this to the government. He said that the government should now, quote, get on with it, do at least get that bit right. But you've not yet had replies to your letters to the Prime Minister about setting a deadline.
That's quite right. And deadlines do need to be set. You know, you can't have an endless piece of string in this. People have been waiting far too long, over 20 odd years. There's over 70 have died along the way in the GLO group in there. There are people, well into their 80s now that are still suffering and still having to put up with this as well. They shouldn't. They really shouldn't.
What happens if this drags on for forever and a day? Would you ever go back to court with a crowdfunded campaign for justice?
I would never say never. I mean, it is a consideration. I will not say I haven't spoken to people about this, but I do know if we decide to go down that route that we're going to halt the current scheme, and it's going to be at least another 6, 12 or even 24 months before it moves forward in that direction. Now, that might be a choice people are prepared to take. I mean, we've got a group meeting coming up in a few weeks' time, and that's one of the options that we're going to discuss. That and a few other options as well. But we've got to move this forward, and hopefully after today you'll be able to bring a bit of pressure to bear on them as well. It's the deadlines that need to be set in this. They're terrified of having deadlines set, the department.
Thank you, Liam, and thank you very much for joining us, and it's wonderful to meet you. I wanted to just pull up a little bit more on what Liam was just saying, if I could, Sir Alan, because you previously spoke about how you don't think that the financial redress was either fast or fair, and I think you've been more than fair in your response to Liam, but I wondered if you could paint a bigger picture as to what do you think is fair, rather than allowing someone else to set that standard of fairness. What would you say if you were to write that standard?
Well, I know there are people who are working their way through the scheme and who are achieving and settling their claims. And I believe, because I get letters and emails from them, that they've felt that they've had a fair offer or they've accepted a fair offer. But when you're starting, or when you're being offered a third of the amount in the first instance and all the rest of it, when your claim's been put together by professionals with the support of legal professionals, by the support of accounting professionals, and then you've got to, if you like, argue your way all the way from the ground all the way up in it, it doesn't seem very fair, does it, if you're starting from there? So it's a tough battle, and we shouldn't need to do that.
And I think you've partly answered what I was going to ask, which was about how you feel other members of the Justice for Subpostmasters Alliance feel about that fairness. So some clearly think they've got a fairness, but what you are describing is that they're very different experiences of this. And have you got any sort of stories that you wish to share from the members of the organisation?
Well, I think the lawyers will be able to give you sort of numbers involved in this, who are through and all of that. But the impression I get is certainly those who took the 75,000 offer in the first instance and they've moved on. I think they've obviously felt it was a fair result for themselves in there, and they can get on with their lives because obviously their claims were relatively small. There then have been a proportion of people who also have lower ending, above the 75,000 but lower claims, and I think they're working their way through, and those have probably been resolved. And I know some of the more complex cases have as well. But the bulk of those that are left, the few hundred that are still outstanding, they're probably the more complex cases, and they're the ones that are going to take a lot longer to resolve. And there are going to be far more challenges along the way.
Thank you.
I may not briefly, and then Rosie Writing.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for being here today. Just splitting the kind of four schemes into two. So there's two with a C in it, conviction in it, OC1 and HCRS, and then there's GLO and HSS. So just focusing on GLO and HSS, where people were not actually convicted, if I'm correct. So in both the GLO and HSS, we're looking at a 75,000 as a kind of the headline sum. I mean, I think you've really answered quite a lot of my question I was going to do, which is that seems to be, given the misery that people went through, frankly, to be not very much money for the years and years of pain. And that is why, presumably, a lot of people are like, hang on, this is worth arguing about, because 75,000 just doesn't cut it. And I'm not sure whether the DBT actually are on the same page on that. What's your view of that?
Well, I think I think the 75k was a band brought in because there were a lot of smaller claims in there, and I think that was a good option to sort of, a few thousands or something of that nature, or 10,000, 20,000. I mean, as I say, the lawyers will probably be able to answer those questions better than me on this. But there's been the banding worked well there, and possibly banding should be looked at levels above that as well, even if it only clears out a proportion of them relatively quickly. It could be an option that could be, explored quite quickly, I think, by quite a few individuals.
Thank you. Thank you. Rosie Wrighting.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for coming in today. Jill, I understand you're here on behalf of your mother, Janet. I was just wondering if you could tell us a bit more about her story.
I've wrote a little bit down. Am I okay reading that out?
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
So my mother was a postmistress for almost 16 years. Like a lot of other postmasters, she was highly regarded in the community. Our first office, she won Best Post Office and represented the North East in the finals in London. Our next post office that she bought had the Horizon system fitted more or less after taking over, and the problem started immediately. The helpline were just giving her the same answers all of the time. It was just, no one else is having this problem, and you need to make good the shortage. Finally, after several requests, we did get a gentleman to come out and have a look and sort of do an audit and see where the problems lay. He couldn't solve the shortage problem, and again he told me mum to make good the shortfall. More than 20 years later, when we've gone, obviously Alan's opened this, and we've received some paperwork from the post office, and actually in that paperwork, the gentleman reports, he actually says his words, and I quote, "I think Mrs. Moorhead is hiding something. I have told her she must put the money in." He made this allegation without any proof whatsoever, and this was the type of people that was being sent round to help postmasters. My mum was quite fortunate because she was able to put the shortages in. She was able to, like I say, she put the shortages in, but she did worry. She did live under the stress, the anxiety of a shortage occurring that she wouldn't be able to afford. As well as a postmistress, she was a former school governor and a magistrate. So as you can imagine, she was very conscious that if anything was to come out, the media would have a whale of a time with her. And obviously she wouldn't be looked upon leniently in a court. Sadly, she sold the post office, just totally disillusioned at a ridiculous price. And then she we lost her 2 years later, and myself, I'm here for my dad, my 3 brothers and my mum. It definitely affected my mum's health. The stress, the anxiety, how she lived, it definitely did. And as far as our offer goes, like what Alan said, we've had 80%. We got above the 75,000, so we were sort of maybe the next category up. When I initially made the enquiries, I was told the scheme was closed and that they were no longer taking anybody else on. I then contacted our solicitor, who he sort of said, well, we need to try and get it reopened, you need to push, you need to, we're trying to get as many people to get back onto the scheme. Eventually I got a pack through to fill in, and it wasn't easy to fill in. I did it myself because obviously there was no legal team would take it on because the scheme wasn't open. So I filled it in myself. I was given an offer Sorry, I'm jumping ahead. It was October 22 when I got that form returned back to them, and it was August 23 when we got our offer. So 10 months later, they gave us an offer. I then contacted Neil Hudgell's solicitors and was advised not to accept the offer. They would get an interim payment for us. And since having the solicitors deal with us, our offer has turned out to be just over a quarter of what has actually been found in the forensic evidence of what we lost.
You spoke about the worry and stress that your mum lived with. Can you tell me how this has impacted the wider family?
Absolutely. It was just, I mean, now we sort of, obviously we're reliving it because we're going through all of this and we really don't need it. You know, they're asking for probate certificates stamped by courts, and you can go online and you can check if probate's been granted. And it's just stumbling blocks all the time. So that's affecting us now. But I think as a family, when we were younger, Mum was always just preoccupied. She was always just very anxious. She was agitated. She was stressed. She didn't want to go to work. And I mean, she went from winning the best post office in the northeast to loving her job to just being totally disillusioned.
And Weston.
Thanks, Chair. Jill, thanks very much, and thank you all for being here. Can you just talk through a little bit more about the experience that you have felt going through the HSS scheme?
Well, it's not very user-friendly. It's very legal. The letters that we've received, they're not nice letters. They're not letters where you think, they're trying to help you or you're gonna get through this. And I think it's more about the time. I'm sort of doing this now for my dad. My dad's 74. He's had 10 years without, it was 10 years yesterday since we lost my mum. He's had 10 years of not having mum, and then the previous years before that, 11 in the post office, of just constant battling with shortages and it's just...
When the post office first made you an offer, did you consider it to be fair?
We did, if I'm perfectly honest, we did consider it to be fair because we weren't aware of what we'd actually lost. We contacted the post office and they sent us all the documents they had, redacted letters and what have you, accounts, but there was 5 years missing. There was 5 years of data missing. And then there was points of the claim that the solicitors have pointed out which weren't made aware to us. So, like for instance, cost of the property. Mum sold it and she sold it at a loss to get out. But we didn't think that would have increased by the time she would have sold it in maybe years to come if this hadn't happened with the post office. So the points like that the solicitor sort of helped us with, and that's, like I say, increased our case. And our offer that we've received, like I say, it's a quarter, just over a quarter of what we've actually lost.
You mentioned in your earlier remarks about the fact you submitted back in, was it October 22?
October 22.
And you didn't get a response until August 23, 10 months. Why do you think it took so long?
I really don't know. I put it down to maybe the scheme being closed and them just sort of putting them to one side to see whether they were going to reopen it or not. I don't know. I can't answer that.
Okay. You're talking about, I'm sorry about the loss of your mother 10 years ago yesterday. And clearly the anxiety played a big part, I'm sure, or can imagine, on her illness. You said that the lawyer told us that, your lawyer told us that the post office had said that stress really didn't play a part, and that you couldn't demonstrate or couldn't prove that had an effect. What was your reaction to that?
I think it's absolutely disgraceful because I really genuinely believe that the stress shortened my mum's life. It's been proven stress does, brings on all sorts. But yeah, I think it's absolutely disgraceful. you can't put a price on that. How do they know what they didn't live in the shoes? They don't know.
Okay. The other thing that your lawyers have said is that in disclosure provided by the Post Office, that they laid blame on your mother for the shortfall losses. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Well, we only found that out when we received the paperwork from the Post Office after I'd filled in the form. And so, like I say, more than 20 years later, and there was a redacted letter, and like I say, it literally said, I think Mrs. Moorhead is hiding something, and I've told her to put the money in. And so everybody that read that report, when he went back to the office, because he couldn't find any problems, he came up with this allegation to cover his own inadequacies, because he couldn't find the shortage or the problem. So 20 years of people reading those reports thinking Mum's a thief. And
Let me just ask, when your mother was originally asked to repay the money, how long was she given to repay?
he had to put it in on balance day. So we would
So straight away?
Straight away. So our largest shortage was £5,000, and that came to light. It was something the Horizon system was doing, where it was doubling the first class stamps. So you were looking like you had twice as many. So that the cash, obviously stamps were cash in the post office. And yeah, so that it was literally, you'd done your balance on a Wednesday, and if there was a shortage, you had to start that following week on the Thursday morning on an even keel. So that money had to be put in.
Where on earth did you get £5,000 from by the close of business?
I don't know, I think she must have had it hidden somewhere. I don't know, I really don't know. That was left to Mum to deal with. But we had other businesses that we ran as a family, so I think we did sort of pull from one to the other to compensate.
Thanks, Jet. Just to come back on that, it was really only because that you had, or she had, other businesses in the family that she was able to offset some of those monies.
Absolutely.
And do you think, sort of in retrospect, how long were she was able to sustain the business because of that? And if she hadn't had those other businesses, she'd have lost the business a lot sooner.
Absolutely, she definitely would have. And that was she was living with that anxiety all of the time, because it was just, what's Wednesday going to bring? What shortage are we going to have? Am I going to have the money to put that in to start Thursday again? Because you phone the helpline, and everybody on the helpline was just, well, nobody else is having this problem. And I had that first hand. I rang the helpline myself on numerous occasions, and it was, nobody else is having these problems. You need to make good the shortage. And that was all we got.
Finally, the duress, the anxiety, the first shortfall was when, and the final one was when?
Sorry?
The first shortfall that was discovered was when, and how many years later was the final?
The first shortage was within a week of Horizon being installed, and that was put down as teething problems. But I think, if I remember rightly, I think it was installed in the September, and she was still having shortages by the December, and she was running the old system, the paper system, alongside this. This system was working out, but the Horizon system wasn't, so she knew it was something the system was doing, but didn't know what it was doing.
Okay.
So you've been waiting for 20 years for redress,
Yeah.
and yet your mother was expected to make good the gaps in a balance sheet within 12 minutes.
Hours. Yeah.
Ordinary.
Yeah.
Just wanted to check your experience about applying for the compensation seat for the redress scheme, because a lot of people have said to us that you get hit by a barrage of questions that are really quite difficult to answer. You said that you answered those questions yourself. Can you just tell us a little bit about that experience of trying to answer all those questions?
It was really long-winded, and it was really in-depth, and they were asking questions of things like what the shortages actually were and how many times it occurred, how would we know that? You know, how I was doing this on behalf of my mother who'd passed away, and it was just impossible to answer. So I was trying to be fair. I was trying to, you know, so we sort of did a range of, we knew the largest shortfall was 5,000, and they ranged from £5, £50 throughout. So like I say, I couldn't put a figure on that, so that was left to the post office, and then they came back and made an offer of what they thought. And like I say, our offer that we were given has turned out to be just over a quarter of what we've actually lost.
You were kind of expected to be psychic when you were...
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
You're psychic?
Not at all. Not at all.
But how did you feel when you're being asked to put these numbers down? I mean, that doesn't feel very fair to me.
Well, it was just a case, what do they expect? What do they want me to do here? I haven't got a clue. I'm filling this in as best I can, yet they're ready to sort of jump on us for, you know, this needs to be sorted, that, you know, we need the probate certificate, we need this, we need that. Yet they were expecting me to know the figures from 11 years ago at the time. Sorry, 20 years ago.
Yeah. Would it have made more sense, do you think, if you were actually given a bit of legal or other advice and support up front?
Yeah.
When you were filling that form in?
Yeah, definitely. I think, I mean, it just goes to show that asking me for figures that they haven't even got themselves, because when I did get the data that we requested, there was 5 years missing that they didn't have, yet they expected us to know what we've lost.
Yeah. Let me come to Joshua Reynolds, Charlie, and then I'm going to come to Gregor to move us on.
Thank you, Chair. Jill, your scheme's being administered by the post office.
Yeah.
So was the expectation just fully on you to deal with all of this, fill these forms out, have everything? Were you given any support by the post office in terms of trying to get that?
Nothing at all.
Even though they knew, obviously, with the 5 years gap in the middle, they knew the numbers that they were expecting you to just provide them?
Yeah.
Why?
I have no idea. And when they sent the documents that they did have, they were practically ineligible. You just couldn't read them. You had magnifying glasses on them, and they were so tiny. It was just disgraceful, but it wasn't helpful at all.
The expectation was for you and other subpostmasters to be able to do all of this, fill everything in, have all of that expertise around you, when the post office themselves had no idea in reality, because you couldn't decipher it. There was no way they could.
Yeah, exactly. And like I say, they expected us to have figures that they didn't even have. Yeah.
Charlie?
Yeah, thank you, Jill. Thank you. Just playing that back about your mum putting in money repeatedly, and then finally the post office or the auditors of the post office work out that actually, you know, that there was a 4 times differential. So they ultimately were able to figure out what she had put in, and if they could work it out for your mum, then why aren't they working it out for every single one like that?
I think for myself, what they've worked out is that there's things that I didn't know I would be able to claim for. So I filled the form in as best I can, and I sent that off. We've got the offer. It's then gone to the solicitors, and then if there was, so for instance, there was a distress and inconvenience, we'll pick on. You can't put a figure on that. It's not actual. You can't put a figure on it. So they just gave us nothing. We just got nothing. There was 3 headings that fell under the unquantified. It was said, and that was because we didn't put a figure on it, because we didn't know and we couldn't. So they just decided, they'll not get anything for that. Distress, personal injury. I think personal injury was at the 8,000, if I remember rightly. Yeah.
Do you think that what the post office asked of you was fair?
Absolutely not. No. And I mean, even if Mum had been alive and they'd asked Mum, she would have known more than I did. They knew I was making the claim on behalf, and they knew I wasn't the postmaster. They knew I just worked in the office. So absolutely not, no, it wasn't fair.
Did the amount of detail that they asked for, did that slow down your claim?
Yes.
Did. Okay.
It must have took us 2 months to fill the form in.
Wow.
Yeah.
Nikki.
Thank you, Liam, and thank you so much for coming today. So your mum was obviously running a paper copy of what was happening and also the Horizon.
Yeah.
When did she present the case to the post office to say there was discrepancies, and when did they actually start taking note?
So we made lots of phone calls about little shortages, and again it was just, they would just tell us to put it in. I mean, I've seen me and Mum, the programme that was done with Alan, when Joe Hamilton was on the floor with the dockets, that totally resonated with me, because I've done that with me Mum. Yeah, so it was just... Sorry, can you repeat your question there?
So, as you're running the paper copy and the Horizon, when did you first alert the post office saying there's discrepancies between what the paper's running and what is the Horizon systems running? That was
the December, when the gentleman came out to the office and we showed him what we'd been doing, and he just wouldn't...
How many times did you have to speak to them to say there's actually something wrong now with the system? When did you identify there's definitely the system problem?
I would say the December time, yeah. Mm-hmm.
All right, sorry, just to follow up on that question. The person that was sent out to look at the books, were they an accountant?
I don't know who they were. If it was just a gentleman that worked for the post office.
No.
And he sort of came out, done an audit, and yeah.
So you don't know if they were qualified to assess a set of financial books in front of them?
I don't know.
Thank you.
You're shaking your head, Alan.
No, I did a Freedom of Information request about the qualifications of the so-called auditors that Post Office sent out. And there weren't any. There weren't qualified auditors as well. And also, they refused to allow people to bring in their own accountant to check the books as well. That was another refusal they always used to do.
This whole process has been riddled with unfairness, and it doesn't feel like we've got rid of that unfairness. Just one last question before I hand to Gregor Poynton, which is, do you ever feel that as you were going through the application for redress, do you ever feel that you were given the benefit of the doubt or not?
There was a little bit of the form that I was filling in, and I remember because Mum and Dad sold the post office for, I think it was about £31,500 less than what they'd paid for it 11 years earlier, so Mum could get out. And I remember putting that figure down, and we had that asked for land registry, that asked for all sorts of paperwork to prove what we'd sold the business for. We had to get figures from our sellers that had to show the goodwill, the fixtures and fittings, and then obviously the property prices. So we had to get all that to prove that. And I think they did offer us the 31.5 to sort of meet that. But if I'm perfectly honest, no, I don't think there was no benefit of doubt given.
Despite
I think it was
everything
just,
the post office put you through, despite all of the time, there is still no benefit of the doubt along the way. Gregor Poynton.
Mr. Lewis, to you next. Yes. We're going to look at the administration structure of the redress schemes, but I think it's just important to hear the human story before we start, sir. So be keen to hear from you in terms of your story and the impact that's then had on you.
Okay, well, a lot of what I heard resonates very closely. It's 6 years tomorrow that I lost Mum, and she used to work for me before her retirement with me in the post office. I ran the post office in Penrhydeudraeth I ran the shop from 1979 till March this year. I ran the post office from 1985 till the 15th of March 2011. Beware the Ides of March. We'll never have such a... I should have listened more to my English literature master at school. When everything went belly-shaped. We'd worked with Horizon until the previous August, September, when they did the upgrade. And that's when we started getting massive shortfalls. I was a senior county councillor. My MP who's here today sat on the same cabinet with me on Gwynedd Council, and public duties were my life. That all came to an end on the 15th of, well, the auditors, Mr Bradshaw, arrived on the 15th of March, and I resigned everything on the 15th of July because I was advised very strongly to plead guilty and to make short the 53,000 they claimed. My parents had to take equity release on their retirement house. They'd both retired after a long career. Mum was a schoolmistress before working for me in the post office. My father was an insurance broker and another county councillor before me. So we're well known in the community. And we said, well, if you pay it back initially, we won't charge. And then they said, oh no, we found out you're a county councillor, you'll be front page news, we're charging. And that was that. So I was pleading guilty to try and reduce the sentence. I served 4 months in Her Majesty's Prison, Altcourse, and it was dreadful seeing Mum and Dad having to come in and see that. And I felt more for them than for myself. I knew what I was going through, but they could only imagine. You know, having said that, I was lucky. There were postmasters who had to go through far worse prisons than Altcourse. Another postmaster from North Wales, Noel Thomas, he had to suffer Walton, one of the old type prisons. I'm not sure if I'd have survived that, but came out from Altcourse. The chairman of the magistrates came to pick me up from Altcourse on the day of my release. He saw a few of his old clients on that day. And then I just carried on running the shop with the post office, rented the counter from me for a number of years. And then I kept on running the shop, which the post office said was failing, for another 14 years until I retired on 31st of March this year. And in the meantime, I lost both my parents, had a divorce during that time, and become, well, depended on medication to get me through. I was very, very fortunate. My community and my friends and family stood by me. I didn't have any of the nasties some of the other postmasters had to. So I count myself as being very lucky on that. My community all knew me and nobody thought I was guilty. So I ran the shop, became somewhat of a recluse, didn't do anything publicly, couldn't do anything publicly until I received the letter of exoneration, quashing all I received it on the 22nd of August this year, 2 days after I got married to my latest wife, who stood by me. She used to fly in from Dublin. She was a bank manager in Dublin, in Naverton, and used to fly in from Dublin airport to John Lennon. She was on first name terms with people in John Lennon airport every fortnight to see me in Altcourse, and that was the sort of support that got me through everything. And so community, friends, family, and blessing, faith kept me going, but also the support of those family, friends, and community has been invaluable. I count myself as being very, very fortunate compared to a lot of other subpostmasters and their families who have had it even worse than myself, and all those postmasters who haven't seen the day when justice was seen to be done for the first time. Okay. And thank you for the opportunity of coming here today as well, and the work you're doing as a Select Committee. We're very grateful.
Thank you. Yeah, Mr. Lewis, you'd mentioned that the problem seemed to start when the upgrade came in. I'd be just interested to hear what you were seeing in that period, and if any communication you had with the Post Office about the problems you were seeing.
My retail support manager was very good and was trying to get to the bottom of things and couldn't understand. And the line was, well, yes, we're aware of everything. Leave it with me, we'll see what we can do. And that carried on until the March when the auditors came through, and then when the heavy mob and Mr. Bradshaw, the investigator, came through and started making the threats and saying, well, yes, come up with a good story.
Yeah. So you could tell there was something going wrong, but they couldn't. They weren't
No.
really helping. They weren't trying to get to the bottom of it on a
No.
discussed it on a sort of good faith basis. And then suddenly there was an investigator at your door, banging on the door, asking for the money back. And at that point, you mentioned you were looking to then find a solution. I mean, how were you able to? You said it meant your family were having to take money out of their homes and so on. So is that where you were looking to get to with that?
Well, before that, because I was so concerned about it, I approached my MP at the time, and I approached my bank to see anything we could put this in to try and see that we could go through it. And there was nothing we could do. This was 3 years after the crash. So, and the only people that didn't support me through the whole of it were the banks. The banks and the Post Office didn't basically want to know.
Joshua Reynolds. Sorry.
Thank you, Chair. You've used the word fortunate and lucky, and I don't want to speak for other members of the committee, but when I hear you say those words, it's heartbreaking for me, because you are an upstanding member of your community, and the fact that you feel lucky and fortunate because it's not as bad as others experienced is truly awful. I want to talk a little bit about your experiences going through the Horizon Conviction Redress scheme. How has that process been so far?
Having listened to Alan and Jill, this started on letter of Poshing arrived on the 22nd of August. We were told that the redress scheme was in place and that we had a choice of taking the 600,000 or fighting for more, but that an initial payment of 200,000 would be made in 2 to 3 weeks. That was the understanding that we had, and that's my solicitors at Hudgels had. Started off, that was the first letter from Ministry of Justice. 2 weeks later, we had another letter from Ministry of Justice. They'd mixed up the reference numbers, my case numbers. The case numbers on both letters were the same. So we're not quite sure what the situation within Ministry of Justice was. When the Department of Business and Trade finally agreed that they'd had the right reference number, which was the same one, they said, oh yes, they'd be processing the claim. That was early September. That was 5th of September. And we were told, yes, you're registered under the scheme. Nothing was happening. And the staff at Tracy and Neil Hudgell were brilliant in supporting me. I'm sure they must have thought that I was a pain, because I was asking them every week, anything happening? And no, they were having weekly meetings with the Department of Business and Trade. They were taking, because I'd been through an IVA after coming out of prison, they had to have legal, even though we furnished them with a certificate of completion, which went back to 2019, I think it was. They said, oh no, that's not good enough, we have to check, we have to have legal opinion on that. The legal opinion seemed to be slowing the whole process down again. Then we were told, well, you can have the 200, or do you accept you could go for the 600 and draw a line completely. I said, and after what I've heard from the other colleagues today, I said, yes, we'll take the 600 because there's no fight left in me to go for forensic accountants, valuers. How do you quantify what the value of the post office was if it went for sale, and the property where I lived went for sale in 2011, and what it would be today without how long is a piece of string? So we decided, right, rather than fight, we'll go for the 600,000. Until last week, we had no inkling when we'd even get the initial payment. Lo and behold, it was announced, I think, after speaking with the staff here, that I was going to be in front of you. I think that was announced on the Tuesday. Oh, surprise, surprise, Friday morning, check the bank account, the 200,000 had arrived. Now, I try not to be cynical, but I'm finding it very difficult.
Miracle of a select committee.
And, oh yes, you have much more power than I thought. And then, but we were told, yes, there'd be a deed of agreement coming out with that. Hudgels, by the day, are still awaiting that deed of agreement or settlement deed so that we could progress and get the rest of the settlement. And that's where we are as of today.
And so you said that you've taken taken the deal with that 600,000 because you've got no fight left. Do you believe that that 600,000 takes into account all of that in your head, that financial and emotional loss that you've experienced, or is it a means to an end?
I'm not sure. I doubt it, because the 600,000 includes the 53,000 that we put in, plus the interest of what that would be by now, during a period of quite high interest rates the last few years, during the period of austerity when interest rates went up. And it includes what we would have got from a colleague share plan, which the post office had at that time. So looking at the heads of what would possibly be, I'm not sure. But as I said, after the experience of Sir Alan and Jill going through with the post office and with the DBT, I want to get on with my life and do other things rather than carry on fighting. The difference in my health since I had the letter of exoneration, I never knew how much it had taken out of me. Before that, I wouldn't get on the train to London. And never mind go out and do public interviews, etc., which I've done last few weeks. So I can't understand. In the meantime, I've come off most of my anxiety and stress medication, which had been going up. I was on the top end of things. Since August, I've been able to come off those. But the longer the fight goes on, I'm not sure. It's very difficult to quantify.
It's slightly against us, so I'm just going to move us on just to some of the final things that we just need to check with you. Alison Griffiths.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, thank you so much. It's been incredibly moving hearing your testimony. A question I'm going to actually slightly change the question I wanted to ask in light of what you've been saying, but the question I was going to ask, so I'm going to ask you two questions. First of all, do you have faith that the schemes are designed with the best interests of the subpostmasters in mind? But the the question I'm going to actually ask is, do you think they were intended to be designed with the best interests of the subpostmasters? So I suppose I'm sort of inserting human fallibility in there as well. I'd love to hear thoughts from all of you on that.
Alan, do you want to pick that up first?
Yeah, well, I think as far as intended, I would agree. Initially, I think there were thoughts that it was going to be a benefit to the subpostmasters, which is why we engaged with the process right at the start. How it's turned out is it doesn't seem to be for the benefit of it. It does seem to be for the benefit of the department more than anything else, to run it through at their speed and on their say-so. Can I just divert that question or the answer to that slightly and answer something I just thought about afterwards from the fellows asked earlier? It was about the if we went to court with this matter, and I was saying it might take 6, 12, another 24 months in there. But what I should have also added at that point was that if deadlines are not set for the schemes to be finished, then there's every chance, certainly, as I was saying, there were more complex cases now that are going to go through. If they run the full gauntlet of what's available or part and parcel of these schemes, which is, to go back and challenge them a few times in there, then to take it to a panel and all the rest of it in there. If 100 or 150 cases decided to do that, that could take years in its own right to get that far. So it might be quicker for us to go back to court and get an end of a 12-month sort of finish line that we know we can achieve. This is one of the reasons why we feel a deadline must be set for these schemes. Sorry, I took it slightly different.
What was your perspective on that question?
So on the question I was asking, whether you had faith that the schemes are designed or intended to be designed with best interests.
I think the intent was there, yes, on paper, but I think when it's come down to actually dealing with it, there's just too much red tape, there's just too much, they're just wanting proof of everything, and so no, I don't think it's got the best interests at heart for that reason.
Harry?
I have my doubts. I think that 3 things that still concern me. One is nobody has an idea where the 600,000 came from as a figure. Was it just a figure plucked from the air? In the recent budget, the Chancellor announced 1.8 billion for the whole package. The previous figure that we understood was 1.2. We don't know if that 1.8 is extra to the 1.2 or total, or is it does it include all the claims? Does it include the legal costs? We don't know. And then the other one, finally, is this business on timetable. I noticed yesterday the head of the 4 redress schemes at the post office told the public inquiry that, 302 million out of 1.2 or 1.8 has already been paid out. But by March 26, he expects it to be up to 1.5 billion. Now, a realistic timetable, thinking of the age of postmasters and what we've been through, I believe a realistic timetable would be March 25, not 26, for the whole settlement of, I think, that is the final message I'd give over. And if you think that these are for fairness for the postmasters, I think that's what I'd take from today and emphasise is, where did the 600k come from? Where did the 1.8k come from? And where is the timetable to aim a finish line for everybody that's going through all this additional pain now?
Yeah, very useful, thank you. Lastly, Antonia Vance.
Thank you. So this is redress for what everybody accepts has been a massive miscarriage of justice. And it seems completely inappropriate for the processes to be so slow, so very legalistic, for the proof needed to be so high. I wonder if there were a way of doing this that could have a lighter touch in terms of the burden of proof needed and the weight that places on people to prove down to the minute detail their claim. And I wonder if you wanted to comment on that.
I think for me, as far as that goes, so the post office know who were postmasters, who were postmistresses, and for how long. They know when the Horizon system was fitted. They know when the postmaster left. Within that time, they know, because of what's come out about the system, that the postmasters and mistresses have been cheated, and they need to deal with it.
Anyone else want to pick up that question? Do you want to just put it again, Antonio?
Well, I did hear the question, and I was thinking about it just then. And I think a lot of the comments that I might make, I think you're going to hear probably from the lawyers, the solicitors, yes. When you, and I think that it's probably more important to hear it coming from them. You'll believe it more from them than from me.
Well, look, that concludes this panel. I want to thank you for the courage that you've shown, all of you, in coming forward and speaking today. This is not an easy thing to come and give evidence to a committee like this, and I want to thank you for your tenacity in pursuing this. What you've told us today is that after all of these years, even though you may have had minutes or hours to make good shortfalls, after years and years, you've still not had the redress to which you're entitled. You've told us that there's not enough help up front in actually putting the claims in. You've told us that fairness is getting lost when offers are put on the table. You've told us that it's a mystery, frankly, as to how some of these numbers are conjured up. And you've told us that there's a really clear need for deadlines around this process. And there's a real risk that if we don't have those deadlines, then sub-postmasters who have already suffered so much may be forced to go back to court. Thank you very much indeed for your evidence today. That has been invaluable. That concludes this panel. Order, order.